One early morning, the atmosphere was quiet, and I couldn't hear any vehicles at all. This was unusual because my house was located by a busy road. But today, it felt empty. I woke up from my sleep. Everything around me was dim. The light from outside the house entered my room. I looked around and saw my mother beside me. Then I saw her, a figure who seemed sad at that moment. Why was she sitting there? Who was she? Was I still dreaming? I rubbed my eyes to make sure who was there. She was there, sitting at the table in the corner of the room with her head bowed. Her straight hair covered the sides of her face. I didn't recognize her. A black dress covered her body. Who was she? A little girl who I thought was beautiful, even though she was barely visible in the dim light. I just felt cold all over my body, which had just recovered from a fever. Was I hallucinating? I tried to wake my mother, but she didn't respond. "Mom, who is sitting at the table?" I said. There was no answer. Finally, I realized that it was only me and my mother in the house. Fear began to spread throughout my body. I couldn't move at all. I covered my eyes with the blanket, hoping the girl would disappear and that this was just a dream. I peeked from behind the blanket, terrified. She was still there, sitting with her head bowed and her hair flowing, black hair and a black dress. She didn't disappear. Still there. I hid and prayed whatever I could, hoping she wouldn't be visible to me again. The prayers I offered were unorganized. "God, please make her go away," I asked in my heart. I don't know how long it lasted. I just wished the girl wasn't there anymore. I was scared. I heard birds chirping, thankful in my heart that morning had come. Slowly, I peeked again, hoping she was gone, and she disappeared as if she had never been there. Even as I grew up, the girl was still clear in my memory. I wanted to erase her sadness, but I knew she wasn't from this world, and sometimes she watches over me from a distance. This is a horror story about a terrifying experience passing through a haunted route. It's a horror story I will never forget. I never imagined that my journey at that time would become an endless trip on a haunted path. It was precisely on May 1st, 2017. It was around 10 p.m. when I checked the time on my phone. My father was driving the car, and we were heading to City A. I've disguised the city's name. That night, the air outside was very cold. The road was very quiet and dark, with no streetlights. Only the car's headlights pierced through the darkness. I had initially wanted to rest for a while, but became scared to let my father drive alone. Additionally, it started raining outside. It was hard for my father to see the road conditions at night, especially with the rain pouring down. Besides his vision, which was starting to get blurry, there was no street lighting at all. I opened my phone to check Google Maps. Meanwhile, the rain outside grew heavier. My father kept glancing at the rearview mirror, as if to make sure there were other vehicles on the road, but there were none. That night was truly eerie and quiet. The trees lining both sides of the road seemed to draw us deeper into the darkness. After several kilometers, we passed a road lined with large trees on both sides. Beyond the trees, there were steep cliffs. Since it was just the two of us, I felt I had to stay alert for any situation that night. My father frequently complained about his blurry vision, making me a bit anxious. However, we felt slightly relieved. Not long after that, I noticed a beam of light in the rearview mirror catching up to our car. It got closer, and we could see it was a white SUV car. I wasn't sure where the car had come from. I had been sure there were no other vehicles besides my father's car. Suddenly, the white SUV turned on its very bright headlights. This helped my father see the dark road ahead. My father sped up to follow the car that had overtaken us. For 10 minutes, we followed it, but I felt something strange. My eyes felt heavy, but I tried to stay awake. Meanwhile, my father continued to follow the white SUV. I saw the car in front of us turn left. Before I could no longer fight my drowsiness, I quickly stopped my father, who was about to turn left following the car in front of us. My father abruptly hit the brakes. He was startled. "Where are you going, Dad? We want to go home, right? Just go straight." "There's no turn here," I said. I remembered the road very well. There were no intersections, just a straight path. I checked Google Maps again to be sure. My father's face looked a bit pale. I tried to calm him down. I reassured him that there were no intersections on this road. I took a bottle of mineral water from the bag, opened it, and handed it to him. Outside, the rain was still pouring heavily. The darkness of the night surrounded us, and the white fog made the night even more terrifying. A moment later, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up when suddenly the sound of a woman crying came from behind the trees. Moments later, the crying turned into a scream that made my heart pound. Her shrill voice pierced the stillness of the night. I glanced at my father's face. I thought he heard it too. Quickly, he pressed the gas pedal, driving our car away from that place. After a while, he looked at me. "Son, did you see that car turning left?" my father asked. "Son, I'm serious. I just want to make sure that the white SUV turned left," he continued. I nodded. I saw my father's face, which had been calm, now filled with anxiety and fear. It wasn't like him to act this way. "Why, Dad?" I asked. He took a deep breath. The car was silent for a moment. The air inside felt stuffy, even though the air conditioner was still on. The sound of the woman's scream echoed in my mind, making my heart race and my body feel hot and cold. "The road here is haunted," my father said after a moment of silence. "On our left earlier was a cliff. I knew that. But I didn't know why I wanted to follow that car. I felt like I was half unconscious. If you hadn't stopped me, we might be in a different world right now. Son," my father explained in a very soft voice. The hairs on my neck stood up again after hearing my father's statement, even though I already knew because I was familiar with the road. It was my first horror experience. I had never experienced something this scary before. "Dad, but earlier I also saw another road, but it was short as if cut off," I explained. "Yes, that was just an illusion. The white SUV, whether real or not, seemed to intentionally make us feel comfortable, as if leading our car on an endless journey toward death." I felt very grateful. I felt that God still cared for me and my father that night. Honestly, I had no words to say that night. My father also told me that the road we had just passed was haunted. After I researched, it was true that the road leading to City A was known to be haunted. Many victims had been claimed by that road. Most of the victims were couples or individuals. There were cases of cars falling into ravines, accidents, and even missing vehicles on the road that my father and I had just passed. From that day on, I never wanted to and always slept during the journey because of my trauma that night. The road to City A indeed passed through a forest with cliffs and deep ravines on either side. During the journey, there were no turns or intersections, just a straight road. There's a saying that the neighbor's house always seems to have greener grass than ours, but that's not quite the case here. In my opinion, the neighbor's house is eerily quiet, like a graveyard. That family used to live in misery. They even begged for food from other neighbors. But suddenly they became wealthy and prosperous, said my father when he was a guest on a TV program that aired on Thursday nights. The empty house was left abandoned. There was no effort to demolish it or live in it again. If asked why, people would say they felt awkward towards the original inhabitants who disappeared without a trace, and this awkwardness affected the surrounding neighbors as well. I've lived here for 18 years and have never once felt unafraid when looking at the neighbor's house with all its mysteries. My thoughts always drift to negative things that bring disaster and disturbances to our family. Although we aren't always bothered, the passive disturbances are a problem because they are unpredictable. There was a time when I wondered about the fate of the family who lived in that house. But then I thought about how they abandoned that cursed house next to ours, and that night I had a nightmare about a huge black figure staring sharply from the neighbor's window. And the next morning, I saw that same figure in our bathroom. It seems you need to put a metal cover on your window so you won't peek over there, suggested a friend, though it wasn't very helpful. There was also a disturbance that affected a family living next to the neighbor's house. According to rumors I heard, the disturbances lasted all night in various forms. The family ended up staying at another neighbor's house. Of course, it wasn't ours since we lived next to the source of the disturbance. I've heard from neighbors that Mrs. Siska, the mother of that family, would hang clothes to dry in the yard of the neighboring house because the sun shone there. But instead of drying by evening, she received an unexpected gift that night. After such a shocking event, how do you think the villagers would react to the rumors of terror from the neighbor's house? This situation has certainly become its own urban legend in our village, especially after Mr. Hadji, a respected elder, claimed to have seen the apparition himself. Honestly, I didn't believe that ghosts could disturb humans so much until I saw and experienced the disturbances myself. I chose to strengthen my faith and pray because I'm afraid that if I don't, people might use the ghost to get lottery numbers. Mr. Hadji often tells this to the villagers whenever they visit his house. If we were to trace the source of the problem, it remains a mystery whether it's because the ghost is introverted and lacks social interaction with neighbors, or perhaps someone disturbed its resting place, making it feel the need to greet us. But in my personal opinion, this ghost is very sensitive, and just looking at it seems to come with consequences. It could also be seeking attention due to its lonely existence without anyone to talk to. There's another story about a beggar who disappeared after stopping by the haunted house. People found out he was missing because he left his sack behind. I thought, what kind of beggar would leave his sack? Initially, my father, who seemed perpetually tired from being a source of local lore, now had to be interviewed by the police. The beggar you saw yesterday was actually a drug courier that the police have been looking for, said the police officer during the interrogation. My father, bewildered at what to say, responded, maybe it was karma, and the ghost there decided to teach him a lesson. Day by day, I lived under the haunting presence of the neighboring house. The ghost seemed tireless in greeting us, as if we hadn't lived there long enough to warrant such frequent visits. Speaking of visits, the only time my family and I could escape the terror was during the holidays when we would travel to visit relatives. Remembering that one precious week without the hauntings made me long for those days. Unfortunately, the terror resumed as soon as we returned home on the 8th day. Back in 2017, when we returned after the holiday, the first welcome we received was from the ghost. The large black figure I had seen in my dreams blocked my father's view, causing him to accidentally hit a motorcycle, which then crashed into our gate. Being a rational person, my father couldn't blame the ghost and attributed the accident to fatigue instead. This kind of incident happened often, leading my father to discourage relatives from staying over. He said it was out of respect for the ghost in the neighboring house. However, when necessary, some relatives did stay. One time, my aunt and her 2 children stayed over, and they, too, experienced the greetings from our unseen neighbor. This time, the disturbance was typical, just an uncomfortable atmosphere with occasional sightings. For those who had never experienced it, it was quite special and memorable. The lesson here is that if you're not allowed to stay over at someone's house, don't force it. My father's reluctance to let Auntie stay seemed to align with the ghost's disruptive behavior that had previously damaged our gate. Half my life passed with this ghost, never improving our strained relationship. Eventually, we had to give in and leave the house filled with unpleasant memories, even the gate being a victim of a hit and run. My mother, usually silent and accepting, finally spoke up, refusing to let her sister be bullied by a ghost. My father agreed, tired of the daily disturbances. Don't worry, Dad, you're not the only one who feels this way, I said, patting his shoulder. Finally, the day we had been hoping for arrived. The next day, we were really leaving. If there were disturbances on the day we moved, it would mean the ghost wanted to give us a final farewell. I had prepared some parting words for the ghost. Those who come will eventually leave. Those who stay will grow restless. I bid farewell and thank you. For you, the lonely one in the neighboring house,